It's not like TV felt unstoppable in 2025. It's not even as though it felt particularly invigorating or exciting, but God, did it feel healthy. I think it's very hard to take issue with the year that started off with so much genuine animated buzz around shows that were either returning or were spiritual successors to other shows. I'm thinking of Severance, White Lotus, Righteous Gemstones, Yellow Jackets, and The Pit, and then ended with 4 or 5 shows that to me epitomize how willing decision makers in TV are to take chances on visionaries, to make bets on creators that aren't trying to appeal to the widest audience possible, but are really trying to make something that will resonate with a select slice of the audience. There I'm thinking of Pluribus, Task, The Lowdown, The Chair Company, I Love LA. I think it's fair to say that last year there was a bit of IP creep within TV, where you had franchises taking a bit too much of the streaming pie, and in fairness, I think that was a result of original TV shows not living up to their end of the bargain. They weren't the best possible shows they could have been, and that of course leads people to go back to the familiar, to the comfort of intellectual property. It was surreal at moments to kind of survey the TV landscape this year and realize just how much of a kind of platonic ideal we were in, where seemingly for every Andor season 2, there was a Hunting Wives. For every Adolescence, there was a Bear season 4. It was a very sensible ratio of shows that were iterating or adapting on something to shows that were trying to do something completely new that emerged from seemingly out of nowhere. For every show that was trying to be highbrow and impress the likes of IndieWire and RogerEbert.com, there was a show to match that was trying to just simply be fun and entertaining for people, something that they could watch over the summer and not think too hard about. And that's just that will be the feature of 2025 that I will think about when it comes to TV. I definitely wasn't as jazzed about it as I was with 2022 or 2023, but I will always remember this year for seemingly having something for everyone. So yeah, that is my State of the TV Union for this year, if you will. But before we get to today's list, I just want to do a bit of housekeeping. I first want to share my list from last year. Last year, I had a list, and the drive just wasn't there. I wasn't super fond of what I wrote, and then January rolls around, it's like, okay, well, this list has kind of reached its expiration date, so I never actually made the video itself, but I do like to have myself on record for these types of things, so here we go. From 5 to 1, we have The Bear Season 3, House of the Dragon Season 2, Smiling Friends Season 2, Industry Season 3, and FX's Marvelous Say Anything at number 1. Seriously, one of the best TV shows that I've watched since I started really following TV in 2022, so it's a shame I wasn't able to give it its flowers last year, but hopefully if you had ever thought about watching it, this will kind of inspire you to do so. So that was my top 5 from last year. And then I want to talk about some honorable mentions for this year. I want to shout out Apple TV's The Studio, which I thought was great, and I want to shout out Smiling Friends Season 3, which I also thought was great and was so close to making this list, but for me, I thought the first 4 episodes were as dazzling and original and hilarious as anything these creators have put out, but my problem with the show this year is kind of similar to the comment I had in my review of the show last year with Season 2, which is that when you afford yourself only about 88 minutes of screen time per season, you just don't have as much runway as these other shows. You're not giving as much time to impress me, to redeem your shortcomings, and for as great as those first 4 episodes are, I thought 5 and 6 only had one really worthwhile gag within them, the rotoscoping with Pym and the boss in episode 5, and then the phone call between Charlie and the boss in episode 6, and then 7 and 8 for me felt totally flat on their face, did not impress or were very amusing to me at all, and again, that's half the season, just because of how the screen time shakes out. So I still think it's a great season, in large part because of how strong those first 4 episodes are, but just couldn't sneak it onto this list this year. So with all that housekeeping finally out of the way, it is now time for my top 5 shows of 2025.
You had a gun?
I was going to get one.
Coming in at number 5 is Mr. Scorsese, which is the docuseries on none other than Martin Scorsese himself, one of the great filmmakers of all time, and in fairness, this is the type of show that would have been very hard for me to dislike, given how into movies I am, how much of a fan I am of Scorsese himself, and yet, this show had a bit of a hurdle to clear with me because some of the first reviews I saw about it were that it was incomplete, that it was not consequential enough, it wasn't robust enough for his filmography, and I do very much understand that and do think that is a weakness of the series itself. I don't think there is enough time allotted to some of the minor works of Scorsese, but I think what we have here is pretty damn good. And I think what we have here is a 5-episode series that does a rather intelligent job of balancing this interrogation of Martin himself and movie trivia, quite frankly. That is what this show is to me. It is a look into the inner turmoil of this man and his shortcomings, which is particularly fascinating because he is so deified at this point that no one really wants to look into his quirks and his shortcomings as they might with a Tarantino, and a bunch of very interesting tidbits around some of the most revered movies of all time coming from his most iconic collaborators. That is, to me, kind of a match made in heaven. For as frustrating as it can be to hear about After Hours and its importance to Scorsese's career and how much of a return to form it was for him and how valuable it was for him to show he can operate on that type of budget, only for it to be discussed like 3 minutes in total, it is equally such a delight to hear about the importance of The Last Waltz to Scorsese and how miraculously it came together, and to hear about the craziness behind the scenes of New York, New York, and the friction between Sharon Stone and Scorsese on Casino. I think Miller did a particularly good job in pulling out these personalities who are integral to Scorsese's career, but typically don't like to be involved in these sorts of projects. I'm thinking of DiCaprio and Day-Lewis and Foster and Stone, these people who aren't so keen to be in the limelight in this sort of way. And on top of that, you also have a bevy of musicians and editors and lifelong friends that all are able to give angles on Scorsese we haven't quite seen before. And it's impressive that Miller was able to generate so much new content on him, given how much he's been talked about and how much his movies have been discussed and documented in other forms of media. As for the examination of Scorsese, the man, the artist, there is something a bit disappointing in the amount of platitudes that he speaks in that are ultimately accepted by Miller. There is something a bit disappointing in the amount of times his friends mince words about him and tap dance around his own faults in order to not offend him. But at the same exact time, there are just moments like in the 5th episode where Josh Safdie talks about him having to dress as characters from the movies he's making to really immerse himself in that world, like in Goodfellas and in Kundun. And it's like, wow. That is so observant and so revealing about him, and yet we've never seen it before, even though there are countless video essays made about his works and his auteurism, and yet that's a feature of his auteurism that, again, I haven't seen before, despite being such a fanatic of movies and of Scorsese himself. And I think for that alone, the amount of new information that is presented here and how consistently entertaining Mr. Scorsese is, I think it is worth the price of admission. I do think it is a success, even though it doesn't feel like the absolute definitive work that you could have made about Martin Scorsese's movies.
The Millennium Dome. Maybe that wasn't such a good idea.
And now we go from one great docuseries to another, as number 4 is The Diamond Heist, the Guy Ritchie executive-produced docuseries on Netflix that covers the 2000 Millennium Dome robbery. This is truly stranger than fiction material here, in which a disgraced sect of the police force in London is trying to outwit this amateur group of ragtag thieves that are trying to pull off one of the most audacious heists of all time, and it's inside a pseudo-amusement park that no one in the UK seems to care about. The 2 words that come to mind when I think of The Diamond Heist are informative and breezy. Informative in that, despite being about 2 hours less in length than the Mr. Scorsese documentary, it feels just as packed to the brim with detail as that former docuseries. It is so concerned with the minutia of this story, not just in terms of the small little things the cops and robbers were trying to do to outwit each other, but also in terms of the minutia of London at that time, how the public perceived the incoming millennium, how they were kind of underwhelmed by the spectacle the Millennium Dome was supposed to offer up, and I thought it was just incredibly keen of the makers to pick up on that it was not just worthwhile to cover the dynamic between the cops and the robbers, but also the backdrop against which they were fighting against. I think it was an incredibly perceptive move of them, and I think the documentary as a whole is a lot more fleshed out than you would expect from a story like this and from a platform such as Netflix. When I think of the Netflix true crime docuseries that I've watched, the words informative and breezy aren't the first ones that come to mind. The words that come to mind are meandering and punishing and samey, and I think some of those adjectives would actually please Netflix executives. They like that some of these shows feel very much cut from the same cloth, so people can recognize things that are familiar to them, that they're interested in watching because they've watched something else that's similar. They want these shows to take the scenic route so they can get more viewing time out of an audience member. And The Diamond Heist is just of the complete opposite mindset. The Diamond Heist is very much of the mentality as those classic Guy Ritchie joints, Lock, Stock, and Snatch, in that every minute or so there's something new to be curious about, and I don't think that's a reaction to social media brain rot. I don't think that's the show trying to keep you from looking at your phone, because that wasn't Guy Ritchie's intent some 25 or 27 years ago. I just think, like those movies, This show has an incredible amount of respect for the viewer's time. I think it wants the viewer to be gripped with every single solitary moment, and I think it wants to deliver information in a very efficient way, which is a very nice departure from, like I said, the other meandering docuseries that you so frequently see, not just on Netflix, but on Hulu and on Peacock as well. The show's greatest strength is the confidence it has in its style. It is so outwardly playful and snappy in the edit, and cheeky in both the edit and the lines of dialogue that are being said. And man, there were times where the show just flat out deceives you in order to get better reactions from you later on, or to get a heightened amount of suspense you otherwise would not get if the story was told totally straight. And it was such a breath of fresh air to see those types of rules being broken. Because again, the norm with docuseries is to be plain, to be somber and respectful. And a lot of the times that is necessary for the types of stories that are having to be recounted. But because of the lower stakes here, it feels like the people both in front of and behind the camera were willing to be, a bit showman-like. They weren't afraid to make fun of themselves. They weren't afraid to spin these lies, which were eventually corrected for later on. And I appreciated that so much. It felt like the people making this, even if they were on the wrong side of this heist, had fun telling this story once more, and I very much enjoyed hearing it from them. All eyes were on Severance at the beginning of this year, and it was because this was the follow-up season to Apple TV's most respected show after a 3-year hiatus. And like I said in my review back in March, this was a meaningful improvement upon the first season of Severance in almost every single way. If you're interested in my takes on the season, I highly recommend that you watch that video, as pretty much everything I wanted to say about the season is in there. The reason why I don't have much to add today is because the discourse hasn't really evolved over the course of the year, and I think the amount of respect that Severance is getting put on its name right now is perfectly sensible. I think where it is ending up on these rankings is appropriate. It's not being crowned by any means necessary, it's not being unanimously hailed as the second coming of Christ in TV form, but it is getting respect. It is getting talked about as though it is must-watch TV, something that everyone who has an interest in the medium should be keeping an eye on, and one of the best mystery shows of the past decade or so. I am very excited for Season 3. I thought this was a pretty fantastic season of TV, and definitely one of the best of the year.
No business like show business, huh?
If you'll notice, this is me pouring one out, but not too much out. That's enough for Poker Face, because it is dead after this season, and even if it's back in Peter Dinklage HBO form, it will not be the same. What's interesting to me about Poker Face is that if not for the proliferation of the streaming wars, I'm not confident this show even exists. I think that NBC and Peacock greenlit Rian Johnson for this project because they felt this need to have a show that was signature to their brand, that they could call their own, that could go up against the likes of HBO Max and Netflix and Amazon Prime and their marquee shows. They wanted their Severance. They wanted their The Boys. And they chose a guy who just 6 years prior arguably sent the most successful franchise in the history of mankind into a tailspin with very vocal critics, and the show itself is a Columbo throwback with not a lot of serialized elements that is going for a lighter fare in an era where the most dire, uptight narratives are the norm and the most popular type of narrative that you could offer to audiences, and it was awesome. From beginning to end almost, this was one of the best shows of the 2020s, and now it's gone. What I don't get about Poker Face is how it is able to successfully restart itself after every single episode. I just don't get it. How after a quarter of an hour, I really do feel connected to both the victim and the villain in some way. I feel bad for the person that was done wrong. I do feel this sort of dislike for the new menace of the episode. And I'm so impressed by it because I watch these other shows. These shows that are I regard quite highly. Ones like Severance, where you have characters that have been there for multiple seasons on end. Ones like Mark's sister. And I don't care if she lives, dies, makes one decision or another. And I'm more interested in Officer Fran in episode 4 of Poker Face Season 2, one of the lesser episodes of the season, than I am by Mark's sister, who has been there for years now, who I should have a connection to. I don't get how Poker Face is able to make characters that have so much going on inside their head in such a short amount of time. Is it a singular voice, someone like Rian Johnson, who is keeping this whole thing together, who simply has a knack for making characters interesting in a short amount of time? Well, no, because there's 10 credited writers across 12 different episodes of TV. While I think Natasha Lyonne continues to be a magnetic screen presence this season, it's not like she is the constant savior across all these episodes either, because there are plenty of episodes like The Sleazy Georgian and A New Lease on Death that simply do not work if the portions without her aren't good, but they're exceptional. If I had to simplify it a bit and give the most credit to anyone, I suppose it would be the casting people, because they have this uncanny ability to find the right people for the roles here. And some people, like John Mulaney, you look at him and you're like, oh, he would thrive in a show like this. That makes total sense. But then you see people like Simon Rex and Melanie Linsky and Method Man, and you see their name in the credits, and you're like, what the hell? They're in this now? I guess they're going to make this work, I suppose? And then all give some of the best turns of their career. I just don't get how this is possible. I'm going to miss Poker Face quite a bit, at least this iteration of it, because it defies all logic for me. I will never figure out how, with all these different chefs in the kitchen, there weren't more missteps along the way, there weren't more duds of episodes within a given season. You have so many different variables. You have so many people being plugged in and out, being substituted in and out, in the writer's room, in front of the camera, and yet the same quality bar was hit almost every single time. I think that is remarkable. I think it's a bit of a shame that maybe the best episode of the entire series was its last. It feels like there was more room to run with this show, but at the same time, it's nice that it went out with a bang, that it, in its own way, went out on top.
Ryan gets to stay at home until his trial.
Ryan isn't accused of such a serious
Accused.
crime.
It's all accused.
And then at number 1 is Netflix's Adolescence, their critical darling of the year. Do I feel great about putting Netflix in the number 1 position for the first time ever on these sorts of lists, the same year that they are acquiring Warner Bros? Absolutely not. I would literally have it any other way, but the quality of Adolescence to me is undeniable. I talked a bit earlier in the Diamond Heist segment about how Netflix is rather drawn to true crime stories, and they also happen to be drawn to stories that aren't quite true crime, but seem like they could be, and that's certainly what Adolescence is, this story of a middle school age girl in the UK, maybe or maybe not getting stabbed by one of her classmates, and the fallout that comes with her death. Now, Adolescence, like some shows I was taking stabs at earlier, or docuseries I was taking stabs at earlier, is punishing. It is self-serious, it is a tough watch, to be frank, but it distinguishes itself from so many other lesser products that have tried to capitalize on the fixation we all have with true crime right now by showing you very different things, and by showing the kind of perspectives from a tragedy like this that you would have never thought the show would have been interested in the first place. Episodes 2 through 4 shattered my expectations in the best way possible. They each take these unexpected paths down character psyches that previous shows with similar subject matter either never were savvy enough or daring enough to take, and when I first saw the promotions for Adolescence, it was like, oh, it's the oneers. It's the formalism of it all. It's the Iñárritu style that I'm supposed to be paying attention to. That's supposed to be the differentiator here. But no, what I think Adolescence was always supposed to be was this incomparable look at youth violence. This thing that had no comparison, that had no original source material to go off of. While it is a story that feels like it has been done many times beforehand, I think it's fair to say it's never quite been done like this because of how radically it zigs and zags episode to episode. And if we want to swing around the word incomparable, these performances, by goodness. I said in my Letterboxd review this was going to get 4 nominations for the Emmys for performances. It got 5. And then won 3. That is how respected these performances were by the peers, by the people within the Emmy voting body. And it makes sense because the performances are intense. They are gut-wrenching, but never over-dramatic, which I think was very challenging to achieve here. And I'm sure it was likewise a pretty big challenge in the writer's room as well, sketching out the points that Adolescence ultimately made here without enraging people, because to its credit, it didn't really do that. It's not as though an angry mob spawned online to call out Adolescence for absolving people of blame and not holding individuals to account, which I think is a huge testament to how delicately this script was written and how much thought was put into splitting up these different pieces of a blame pie. I mean, that is ultimately the main objective of the show. Stephen Graham said as much in a TV interview where he says, yes, the show is initially about this act and the intrigue of who did it and who didn't do it, but then the show is ultimately about an interrogation of who is to blame when something this bad happens. Is it all just confined to the person that commits the act themselves, or does it extend to the people they regularly interact with? Does it extend to, for lack of a better word, the institutions that they interact with that are affecting their state of mind? Whose failures count? Who is culpable, and to what degree are these different people, institutions, norms culpable? Those are the types of questions that Adolescence is asking. I think it asks these questions in a very respectful, correct way, and I find it a lot more contemplative than most of the shows I have watched since I first began following TV in 2022. And so, for that reason, for the other reasons I have mentioned, Adolescence is my show of the year. And so that is it for today. Number 5 is Mr. Scorsese. Number 4 is The Diamond Heist. Number 3 is Severance Season 2. Number 2 is Poker Face Season 2. And number 1 is Adolescence. That is all for Lightspeed Brothers. Thank you as always for watching, and see you all next time.